all habits brain-based. Not many hypnotists will be able to break this down for you in the way that I'm about to. And once you understand it, once you get it, it will change the way that you look at what's happening in your clients' lives, what's frustrating them, and how best to approach it. Be sure to hit subscribe, like this video, save this video to your favorites, because I want you to come back and listen to it again and again and again, and take examples in your own life and see if you can identify which category of habit they fall into, and where you may have a behavioral adaptation that is also a habit. Hey, everybody. Penny here, the Elite Hypno Pro and Certified Professional Hypnosis Instructor, and we are going to break down this habit situation. Are all habits brain-based? This is a question that a spiritual entrepreneur who took my intro to hypnosis training asked me. So let's start with technically what a habit is off the top. We'll break down the different types. And the last one I'm going to talk about is going to be the habits that are most easy to break when you approach them in the right way. So a habit is basically a learned way of doing something that you have done so many times that your brain has built a neural pathway and you can do it without thinking. Tying your shoes, brushing your teeth, learning to drive a car. When you learn to drive a car, you had to build the habit. They help our brain to thrive because we're not expending calories learning. Imagine if every day when you tied your shoes, you had to sit and think through every single step, just like you did when you learned when you were a kid. It would exhaust your brain. Your brain wants to be wired to thrive in terms of calories, conserving calories, so that when it needs to hit survival mode, it has the energy that it needs to do that. Habits are a survival mechanism. So let's look at classically conditioned habits. Most people have heard of classically conditioned habits. Think of Ivan Pavlov, and when he would ring the bell, the dog would salivate. What happens here? This happens through association. It is called stimulus response, and it simply means that there is a stimulus that has absolutely nothing to do with the behavioral or physiological response. They have nothing to do with one another, yet somehow they become connected. So Ivan Pavlov was doing a study with dogs where he was collecting their saliva. And after a period of time, he began to notice that when he would walk into the room to feed the dogs so he could collect saliva, the dogs would already be salivating. And he thought, well, I haven't given them a morsel of food yet. Why is this happening? So he hypothesized that the dogs had associated him walking down the hallway with receiving a morsel of food, and therefore started salivating in anticipation of that. That's when he set up the famous experiment that we all know about called Pavlov's dogs, where he would ring the bell, give the dog a morsel of food, and after, just a few short days or a couple of weeks, he could ring the bell and the dogs would salivate without being presented a morsel of food. This applies to people in daily life through things such as if you eat in front of your computer every day, if you're always eating in front of your computer, and then next thing you know, every time you sit to work in front of a computer screen, you're craving something to put in your mouth. Same thing with TV. When I would work with weight loss clients, I would say no more eating in front of a screen at all, no computer, no TV. The brain associates that with putting food in your mouth. You won't even be hungry, but you feel like you need to snack on something. That is a conditioned response, a stimulus response habit. Those habits are some of the, I don't want to say most difficult, they're the most time consuming to break. And that is because those habits were built through repetition, 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 repetition. So the way that you break them is you don't actually break the habit, you build a new habit through repetition, repetition, repetition. So, in other words, if you're always wanting to snack in front of a screen, you make a point of just cold turkey, you no longer eat or drink in front of a screen, and you retrain the brain that the screen is separate from food. The food is associated with the dinner table. The food is associated with the dinner table, or your counter, your island, wherever it is that you eat. You create a new association and allow it to become stronger. Another one would be people who smoke cigarettes. If they have a cup of coffee with their cigarette in the morning, you may do hypnosis with them and they quickly become a non-smoker, except that one cigarette. It could be the cigarette with the coffee or the last cigarette of the evening after a shower before they go to bed. Those are two scenarios I've seen in my time. That means changing the routine. You really want them to change the routine. They have to repeat over and over and over and over. Hypnosis helps, but you don't have to have hypnosis to change that. You just have to make a conscious effort and conscious choice. That's something for another time as well, because part of that gets into willpower. People get hung up on willpower, but we'll talk about that some other time. Now we have learned habits of how we do things. Well, we call it muscle memory, right? Those are habits. Tying your shoes is muscle memory. We consider it a habit, but it's muscle memory. When you wake up in the morning, some people, when they wake up in the morning, they have a regimented routine. They wake up, they get out of bed, they say their prayer, they go brush their teeth, and they put on their coffee, then they take their shower, then they get dressed. That is a routine built on habit. They do the same thing every time. People who go into the military, they're building a routine based on habit. They get to the point they don't have to think about it anymore. They just know what to do. In places like the military, this is extremely important because in moments when soldiers are under extreme stress, they want certain things to be automatic so that their focus and attention is on survival. Now, we have other habits that I call reactive habits, but it's actually a little bit deeper than that. When people have pure emotion driven behaviors, which emotion drives every action that we take, but when it comes to emotional habits, procrastination, saying yes to things that we don't want to say yes to, overcommitting, emotional eating. Okay, this is different from the classically conditioned with the screen. Emotional eating, stress eating, smoking, drinking too much, sexing too much, exercising too much, working too much. These are actually called behavioral adaptive mechanisms. We have a part of the brain that basically, along with the amygdala and some other structures of the brain, it begins to take notice of how certain things help us to feel better and what makes us feel worse. So people talk about coping mechanisms. People talk about trauma responses. They throw out all this language. What it is the brain will notice that some behavior, some way of being, something that we do alleviates unpleasant emotional experiences, or it helps us to avoid unpleasant emotional experiences. And This happens within the brain. It's behavioral adaptations. It can happen with physical pain, mental pain, and emotional pain. Okay. It can happen with all of that. These habits, when we can shift a perception around an experience, in other words, when we shift a belief, we can immediately unlink that adaptive mechanism. Now, sometimes out of habit, we might still respond the same way. Okay. So we have this behavioral adaptive mechanism, but it can also be just a habit. When I've worked with my clients to do the deep belief shifting work, this is where my coaching with them comes in, because they'll be like, oh my gosh, this thing happened, but this happened again. And then they'll talk about how they handle it. And they're like, I think I need another session around this so this doesn't happen again. And I will talk to them and I will say, okay, when you recognize you were about to do it and you had that awareness and you did something different instead, was that easy? Like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. Like, mind, we're not going that direction. We're going this direction over here. Was it easy? Or did you get into an internal battle with yourself? Oh, it was easy. I'm like, that was just an old habit and you caught it. It was part belief and it was part habit. It was part behavioral adaptation and part habit. When we broke down the belief and the misperception, that linkage went away. So now when they caught themselves doing it, there was no longer that internal mental, I have to do this. I can't stop it. Why am I doing this again? That was gone. So then when the regular habit pops in, they can stop themselves. Now, let's take this one step further. Sometimes people are so accustomed to being stuck in this old way of being, this old behavioral adaptation. They've attempted to overcome it so many times, but now you've broke the linkage. They've been doing well. And a couple of weeks later, it happens again. And they get sucked in a hole. I will talk to them. And as we work through the process, they don't need more hypnosis. What they did was, when it happened, rather than praising themselves for like, oh my God, I caught it, I shifted it, I moved on, they immediately went into old stories. I'm never going to get better. Nothing's ever going to change. Nothing works with me. Here I go again. I'm in a loop. And then that sucked them into emotional quicksand. This is why when you work with clients, no matter what type of work you're doing, whether you're using classical hypnosis, advanced hypnosis techniques like regression and root cause and forgiveness work, or you're using conversational hypnosis, it is imperative that if you want your clients to have long-term success when what they're dealing with is been something that's been a part of their life for a long time, the self-talk will make or break the result down the road. The self-talk will make or break the result down the road. So you have to listen to the stories they're telling. You have to understand, well, what happens when things don't work out the way you think they should? And you have to teach them the importance of their self-talk, because their self-talk will take them back into this place where their brain, remember the reticular activating system, if they're saying it out loud to themselves, or just our habits of thinking, the brain will start going, well, heck, she expects this to be a problem. Where else can we bring this up in her life? And the brain will find some other issue in life to attach that old problem to, because we're telling the brain on repeat, I need to be caught in this loop. I need to be stuck in this cycle. This is where I'm meant to be. This is who I'm meant to be, when it's absolutely not who you are meant to be. So be sure to hit subscribe, like this video, save this video to your favorites, because I want you to come back and listen to it again and again and again, and take examples in your own life and see if you can identify which category of habit they fall into and where you may have a behavioral adaptation that is also a habit. In other words, it will come up even when you're not in that state of belief anymore. Catch you next time.